Learning Torah is really learning the most sophisticated intellectual concepts that one can perceive. Concepts that the wisest men of history have struggled with and tried to understand. Concepts that Alexander the Great, Antoninus, and every wise man of history tried to understand what are the ingredients within the secrets of this holy structure of Jewish learning that has given out such extraordinary results. When we study the Torah, we exercise our minds in so many different ways because God knew exactly how to give us the kind of information that is necessary for the broadening of every aspect of our intellect and to understand it to such clarity that it is able to effect understanding and emotion as well. So that the learning is not an isolated process. And all of that comes through the mechanism of the learning. So for example, if someone is studying a tractate that deals with a ox goring a cow, and one might think in this mechanized society, that's pretty rare that's going to happen that an ox gores a cow. What do I need to read about it? And in a society where all laws of kashrut are basically taken care of by massive organizations, all we have to know is how to read an OU or an OK or whatever other symbol that you trust for kashrus. You don't have to know the laws of kashrus. You just have to know read to be able to read a wrapper. So what is the concept of the study? But the study itself retains its critical nature because it's the concepts that you read within that study. And as you learn these concepts, you are learning mechanisms that God put into motion that's called His Torah. So together with the fact that the Torah is also a medium by which we know what to do, there's a mitzvah to study Torah itself. Just the study of Torah, in the same way as you have a mitzvah to wrap tefillin every day, or to give charity every day, or to keep the Shabbos, there's a mitzvah of studying Torah. In fact, the mitzvah of studying Torah is one of the mitzvahs of constancy, which means you cannot even waste a moment. From a very technical, legal, high-level perspective, anyone that wastes time from studying Torah and occupies himself with elements that are not so important transgresses seriously. Of course, we're not talking about somebody that is not going to waste a second. Those are high-level people. But in reality, it's not to put a burden upon us. Like our rabbis tell us, that when the Jews crossed the Jordan, it wasn't they that carried the ark. The ark carried them and floated them over the river. It's the Torah that gives us that incredible insight into everything that exists in life. And I'll find that I have a dear friend who's a very, very significant federal jurist, very well respected as a professor, and is an understander of law in a very basic way, has written books of law, and when he hires his clerks, he always likes to get one clerk that has Jewish ordination of legal jurisprudence, because when he has these very difficult cases, he wants to know, what would Jewish law say about this? Because it's so clear, it's so unadulterated, it's so real. So the fact that you study laws that you might say have no pertinence continues to impact your mind by absorbing godly wisdom. And that's in every area of study. There are multiple levels of study. There is study that you need to learn in order to know what to do. You need to learn Jewish law because you need to know how to live like a Jew, basically. What you're allowed to do on Shabbos, what you're not allowed to do on Shabbos. You don't have always a rabbi that's living upstairs in one of your rooms that you can talk to him every second of the day. What to make a blessing on which fruit and what blessing is included in certain aspects. The after blessings, every single aspect, how to get dressed. You need to know that. And for that, there have been great scholars that have abridged these sophisticated systems that do not address the most intricate area of the law by general living. So Jewish law is a fundamental. If you don't learn Jewish law, you just don't know how to live like a Jew. And then there's the learning of the origins of Jewish law, how those laws came about, and what are the systems of those laws, which is the Talmudic structure, which is a very sophisticated means of learning, also from Hashem. Then there's, of course, the text, the Torah itself, the 5 books, the prophets. Can you imagine that most Jewish people could not tell you the difference of the prophecy of Isaiah or Ezekiel or Zechariah or Haggai, or what periods they lived, or who were the major prophets and the minor prophets, and why Esther became a book of the prophets and why the Maccabees did not become the book of the prophets? So there are certain fundamentals that you must learn. Together with that, there's the study of Chassidut. Now there is a lot of controversy among certain levels of Jews of the importance of studying Chassidut, meaning the inner aspects, also called the inner fundamental, internalized, you might even say to some extent, secret elements of the Torah, those that were not easily divulged and were only divulged in the last 400 years after the advent of the Arizal, which really divulged them to a certain degree and then became more popular starting from the Baal Shem Tov, recognizing that the study of these aspects were fundamental in bringing about the coming of Mashiach and the era of Mashiach. What is it about Chassidut? What is so important about it? So from some perspective, you have to recognize that Chassidut talks about certain elements that you will not get those factors in general learning in other areas, such as some of the most fundamental mitzvahs that one is totally obligated to fulfill regularly and constantly, is the acceptance of God, the knowledge of God. As Maimonides says, that the foundation of all foundations and the pillar of all wisdom is to know that there is a fundamental origin to this whole being. Not to believe, but to know. In fact, he takes a position that belief is not a mitzvah because it's an a priori. Because if you're doing it already, it meant you believe it before you did it. So we weren't commanded to believe, because otherwise, why would you accept the command if you didn't believe? So it's a sine qua non, a priori, that your person must believe in order to do. So he says it's knowing God. How about loving God? Love. There's a mitzvah to love Hashem. The mitzvah to have awe of Hashem. You need language for that. And especially in our times, in a post-nuclear period, in the times today, when science talks about the furthest reaches of multiverses, not a universe anymore, but a multiverse, when science talks about the earth having an origin of billions and who knows how far back it goes, and then science enters into areas of the God particle, or the epigenetic structures, or the singularity, concepts that if we do not have a language to interact with it, we can become totally secularized. What does the Torah offer to us? Yet, when you study Chassidus, you get knowledge and a language and an intellectual handle on being able to address concepts beyond where physics is, because Torah was the truth. For example, we never thought the world was flat. Already King David says the world is the globe that hangs in the outer spaces, in the atmosphere. Jewish people always knew that there was an origin to the universe that was beyond our comprehension. So Chassidus today is not just learning a schematic of, the crown is on top, and the right is the kindness, and the left is the severity, the center is the beauty, etc., and all these mechanisms, and wear a red band around your hand, and jump on the beach and start screaming or yowling or whatever, the certain elements that read the Kabbalah in the wrong way. Chassidus is a deep understanding of the fundamentals of Jewish life and Torah life and God's world. It's an understanding of who we are, of what our connection with God is, and how to relate to Him in a manner that is internalized, where we can intellectualize. Because to accept God just from a perspective like a child accepts God is a very high level. But as we get older, our mind starts to work. Now, unless we have responses to the fundamental questions that bother each person, or that is at the forefront of every thinking person's mind, of why we're here. What's the concept of suffering? What's the concept of joy? How do people operate? What's the eternity of the Jewish people? Etc., etc. For that, Chassidus is fundamental. And we must have it today, because otherwise we lose the language of that significant part of our connection to Hashem.